Hello and welcome back to another video in our series around about APIs and integrations and how they pertain to no code. Now, if you've already been following along the other videos in the pillar, you've potentially had a look at all the slides in terms of what an API is, what an integration is, how they work, a few examples, etc. And you may have also watched some other videos, for example, on me making an API request or playing around with a webhook. What I want to try and do in this video is, to the best of my ability, give you some kind of framework for reading APIs that you'll find out there and kind of working with them. This is going to be, I think, by far the most technical video that we have in this whole fundamental tutorial series. What I will say up front is, the reason for doing this is because if you can successfully manage to read API documentation, you're going to be able to do a lot more than what just Zapier gives you or just Integromat gives you. And this is often, it's often the case that something like Zapier will let you do 80% of what an API can do. But if you really want to do everything that another company's data or service offers you, sometimes you've got to dig in and do the API itself. I'm going to try and simplify this as much as possible. You're going to see a lot of things that are going to be daunting, maybe intimidating if you're completely non-technical. And if you're really unconfident with computers, this is maybe not the best lesson for you right now. Maybe go and try and get a couple of no-code apps under your belt before you sort of dive into this level. But we're going to be looking at a few different things. I'm going to show you a sort of universal, what we call a markup language, which is somewhere between written English and a programming language. It kind of sits somewhere in the middle. I'm going to show you the kind of universal language that developers use to sort of communicate APIs and the variables related to them. We're going to talk about objects, which we talked about in our data types and variables videos. I'm going to kind of show you various different types of API documentation, including the Webflow API, the Stripe API, and to some extent the Twilio SMS API. So I'm going to try and show you them because I want you to understand the commonalities, and I want you to just understand sort of how to think about these and how to go about them. So as I say, there's going to be a lot of daunting information, but hopefully by the end of this, you'll kind of understand how to cut through the developer fluff and get into the kind of nitty gritty. So we're going to start by learning JSON, is what we call it. It's spelled like this. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it really is just a sort of quick hand way of writing out almost like a database table. It uses a few different kind of special characters and stuff, so it's going to feel a little bit like programming, but I promise you it's not programming, it's just a special way of writing things out, and I'll show you what I mean. So previously we talked about objects, and if you don't remember from the data types and variables lesson, an object is just essentially a collection of pieces of data which are all related around a topic. It is essentially just, if you use an object in a database, it is really just a table within a table. It just lets you store whatever information you like, but you can store that within a record, or you could think of it as a record within a record. It's just a way of grouping information together. However, when you work with an API, there is generally no visual interface. You don't get to go into Facebook's version of Airtable or their version of Google Sheets or their database and say, oh, I've got these fields, I want to take that. Instead, they simply make that available to you via an API and via objects. And so, if you imagine, let's say, a users table, and it's got a name field and an age field and an email field, rather than receive them as fields, each field would be a piece of data in an object. And every piece of data in an object is simply the key, i.e. the identifier or the field name, like name, email, etc. And then the value, which is, the actual record, is the name John Smith, is it Rachel Smith, is the email, joeblogs123 at gmail, etc., etc. So typically when you work with APIs, now again, Hopefully your no-code tool and your Zapier has an integration that makes this easier, but typically when you work with APIs, you're going to have to use a little bit of key value pairs to send information, and then you're going to have to read key value pairs in the form of JSON when it comes back. Again, there's a lot of tools that are going to like simplify that JSON out, so you just get key value pairs back. But in order to read documentation, you're probably going to have to read this. So I just want to show you what it looks like. So let's imagine that we had we'll put together an object for getting order information, just like our really previous database example. In the databases pillar, we talked about having an e-commerce t-shirt store. You would have a database table for customers, a database table for orders, and a database table for inventory. Let's go ahead and kind of just look at what that might look like as an object if we're going to take the orders one specifically. So when you write JSON, the first thing that you do is you have this curly bracket. It should be on your keyboard, usually above the square bracket. And we usually have these curly brackets, and everything that we are going to write goes inside these curly brackets. So all I've done there is I've just moved that onto a new line, but actually, you know, I could just put a space between it. I could do whatever I want. I'm just going to move it out. So now I've got all this space between these curly brackets. That can be immediately intimidating, but it is just really simple. It is just a way of saying the first curly bracket is where the object begins, and the second one is where the object ends. So, excuse me. Let's say we wanted to have the order number. What I do is I type in an open quotation mark, then I type in the name of the key. So I'm going to say order number. Now you never ever use spaces when you're typing between these quotation marks. You never do it. You always have to use an underscore for a space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my key, and then I do a colon, and then I do something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's going to be my order number. Now let's just take a little bit of a pause there. You know, that can look a little bit intimidating, but actually it's pretty simple if we break it down. So we've done a couple of brackets. So what? You know, we've typed in 2 brackets. That's kind of it. Then all we've really done is write a key value pair. You know, we've got our key, our identifier, which is an order number, and we've got our value, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And all we've done is kind of put a few marks around that. So if you think about it, these kind of quotation marks, these speech marks, they're just a way of me saying this is where the name of the key begins at the beginning, and this is where it ends. This little colon here that I've put in is just a way of saying, okay, that's the key, now start the value, and again, this is where the value begins with this quotation mark and ends. That is literally all it is. It's literally just, here's the name, and then here's the value, here's the name of the variable, the name of the value, simple as that. And JSON doesn't get too complicated from there. If I want to add something else, so let's say I want to add in the time of the order, I simply put a comma in, and all the comma is saying is, you've got one key value pair, now take another. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm just going to hit enter. I'm going to type in order date. So I'm just putting that in quotation marks again, so that the JSON knows that that is an order date, and I'll come back to where you would use this, where the JSON has to know things in a second. I'm just typing this up in the notepad so you can see it, but you know, just put in the order date. I'm going to put a colon, and that colon is just saying, okay, we've done the key, now it's time to do the value in our key value pair. And again, if you go back to data types lesson, there's a ton of information about how these work in there. But now we're just going to get, okay, the order date was the 5th of the 10th, 2021. Now, I've done a UK date format there. You can do whatever you like. Now, if I wanted to add something under there, I would do another comma. If that is the last, however, key value pair that I want in my object, if that's all I want to have and that's it, I do not put a comma. A comma is only used if there is going to be another key value pair. If this is the last key value pair, don't use a comma. That's one of the only rules. And then whenever you have a final, so whenever you have one of these, this is kind of representing an object. If you remember from the data variables, the data types and variables lesson, I said that you can have an object within an object. You could have an object and another object, and another object, yada yada yada, so on and so forth, like, you know, Russian dolls or Doctor Who's TARDIS or something. So one of the things that we can do here, let's say we wanted to talk about the items that were in this order. There's a couple of things that we can do. So I can say I'm going to begin a new key value pair here. So let's hit the comma, and I'm going to say inventory items. However, when I finish this, what I'm going to do is, instead of opening more quotation marks, I'm going to use another bracket. Now this is where things can start to get a little bit complicated, and so try and kind of bear with me here. You know, it might be simple at this level, but sometimes APIs can put these kind of within each other. But essentially what I'm doing here is I'm opening another object within the object. So I've put some more curly brackets in. Essentially I'm saying, instead of having a value after this, the value is actually an object. So I've still got, you know, my inventory items key has still got the quotations in and the colon, but this time I'm going to open these brackets. Now I'm going to push that down. What I'm going to do, just to try and make this a little bit more visually obvious, is I'm going to hit the tab key. I'm going to hit it twice actually, so that everything that I'm going to put in here, all the key value pairs are kind of starting along. You don't have to do that, it's just a good way of kind of visually making it easier to read. So now I'm saying I'm now within this inventory items object. This inventory items object is part of this overall order object that we are creating, and I am going to try to essentially add some more key value pairs in there. And actually, again, it might start to look daunting, but it really is simple, because I'm just going to say, okay, I want to have an item, and I'm going to do, that is going to be called a black t-shirt. Alright, so all I've done is put another key value pair. I'm going to hit comma because I want another one. I'm going to tab in a couple of times. I'm going to do another item. By the way, you know, a key can be the same as another key. You can have, you know, several different keys in there if you like. I'm going to do another item, which is sorry, why am I doing? Well, I'll do a black hoodie. There we go. Could do another one. You know, let's do item white hoodie. And you know, I also might want to do, oops, I made a period there rather than a comma. I also might want to just put something in there that's not related to the items, because I can include any information I want. So let's say I want to total up the number of items. Let me do that. So total items number, and I can do that. And I am just going to finish my air quotation. I'm just going to do 2. You could, by the way, essentially when you're doing these quotation marks, it is a way of saying this is text. You could actually take the quotation marks out and just have 2, because it's a number and not text. You know, the word item is text, the word black t-shirt is text, and that's why we use these air quotes. It's our way of saying the key text starts here, the key text ends there, the value text starts here, the value text ends there, but you can do a 2. Similarly to how I've got no quotes around this object, because it's not a piece of text, it's now another object within an object. So this could be starting to look quite confusing, but let's just take a little bit of a deeper look. So really it's pretty simple. We've got our key, we've got our value, we've got a colon separating them. These are all within an object, which we point out what an object is by putting it in these curly brackets. We then have this inventory items, which is an object within our object. So it's just another layer down. You could almost draw that up in a bit of paper. And within that, we've just added a bunch of keys in values, you know, item, black t-shirt, another item, black hoodie, another item, white hoodie, so on and so forth. One of the things that might be sticking out in your head is, I thought every key had to be unique. It doesn't. It helps if it is. If you can do that, definitely do it, but it does not have to be unique. So essentially that is just kind of how JSON looks. You know, we've kind of got our items there. We've done a comma because there's an item. You know, after the black t-shirt I've done a comma because there's another one. After the black hoodie I've done a comma because there's another one. After the white hoodie I've done a comma. I have not done a comma after the total items number, because that is the last key value that we're going to have within this object. So what I can now do is I can choose to say that's my object, that's all I'm going to have, and I can simply leave that curly bracket, leave that one, and I'm done. However, really when you think about it, as much as it might seem like that's the end of the order object, actually we can still continue to put more stuff in here, because if I just say something like, all right, now I'm going to have the order location, I don't know, that's going to go to United States, let's say. I've just added that in as another variable, no problem at all, because essentially this object, this whole thing here just counts as one line, because here's the other way you could write it. I've just visualized it out as that to make it look easy for you, but actually you could just do it like this, because the spaces don't matter. Everything else is, let me just make my screen a little bit bigger actually. Everything else, it's all about the commas, it's all about that. So, there we go, we've done it just as one line item, and you can sort of see how, okay, immediately that just clearly fits within the object, because essentially it can read that this is a key because it's first, this is a value because it's second. Because of this comma, we now know that we're starting another key. So this is a comma, this is a key, this is a value, so on and so forth, all the way through. And I've made a mistake actually there with total items number. I should have made that have an underscore. But because this is now one line, the thing that we're missing at the end of this little object we've made here, outside the curly brackets, we forgot to put a comma. So we've got to put a comma in there, and that just tells us again that it's another key value pair. So key value, key value, key value, all the way down. But our order location for United States is the last value or the last key value pair that I'm going to have. Therefore, I am not going to have a comma in it. And because this curly bracket is the last curly bracket of the JSON, unlike this one here under inventory items, it does not have a comma, because this is my way of saying the JSON is now over. The JavaScript Object Notation, that is now finished, it's over, it's done. So if you've survived the last 17 minutes up until now, then you've probably conquered the most complicated part. You're not going to get it immediately. Thankfully, I'm about to show you some examples that will help you understand it. You're not going to get it immediately, but it will start to give you an idea of how these APIs think. Now, in reality, almost every API has a ton of different key value pairs in here. There's a bunch of different stuff that comes back, even for the simplest of things. I'm going to show you one example, and then I'm going to split this into a second video where we'll go through API documentation in a bit more detail. And sort of start to talk about the API itself rather than the JSON. But I just want to show you an example how JSON can look. So if I just pull my big face out the way here, and let me just minimize that down. So here I am looking at something called Twilio. Twilio is an API for sending SMS or text messages. There are a bunch of other APIs like it, but Twilio is by far and away the most popular. You will find it integrated with most no-code tools. Because you'll find it integrated with most no-code tools, you'll actually really have to look at the the documentation. Usually it's already done for you, and you don't have to actually look at the API because the integration is already there. But this is me just kind of giving you, I think, a slightly relatable example. Now, don't freak out when you see this. I know there is a lot of information here. You're seeing all sorts of stuff like what's a SID over here, and what's a Node.js, and what is all this. But let's just break this down and make it sort of easy to understand. So if we're looking on the right here, what we have here is essentially a bunch of data that we have to send to an API, and essentially Twilio is just telling us what it's going to reply with. Typically, if you're looking at a request and response for an API, the request being the information you send and response being the information you send back, you're going to see something like this over here. Now I'll explain this, the request bit, a little bit more in the next video, so don't worry too much about it now. But essentially you can see this is our request for sending a message. We're saying send it from this number. send this text which just says body, and send the text to this number. That's it. We've just got this authentication token, which if you remember from the API lesson, we had off tokens, so we'll put that in there. But don't worry too much about that bit for now. I want to come back to that. But at this point, imagine we've just sent a request to Twilio's API with the number that we're texting from, the message that we're texting, and the number we're texting to. This is going to show you what Twilio comes back with. Now we can immediately recognise this as JSON because look, we've got our little bracket, then we've got our key, and we've got our value, and so on and so forth. So there's a few things that are going to happen here. Now the first thing to know is essentially when an API communicates, you might expect that when you send a text message, it's simply going to come back and say, yep, we did it, or no, we didn't do it, and here's why. Actually, regardless of whether it worked or didn't work, an API will tend to send back a ton of different information. Not all of it is always useful. It can be useful just depending on what you're doing, but it'll just give you a bit of an idea of how this looks. So if you had sent a text, this is what you're going to get back. Now your account SID is simply your account number or the Twilio equivalent of a username. So it's just going to confirm back to you the account number that it used, because one of the things that an API will do is it will send you back everything. It won't assume that you already know your account number just because you sent it to the API already. There's various reasons for that. They're kind of technical, so I'm not going to worry about them too much, but essentially the API will always try to send you back every piece of information you need about what just happened. It will never assume that you know it, and it will always send it back almost as a confirmation. You know, if I say, right, my account SID or you know, ID number username is 12345, the API will come back and go, okay, we sent the text, I just want to confirm your account was 12345, because if it actually turned out to be a different account, like 123456, something's went wrong and I want to know that. So what we have here is just really simply the key on the left, which is account SID, and on the right, this is just an example key clearly, which is why it's XXXXX, but that could be, you know, 123, it could be 124, could be whatever. But we've just got the key on the left, the colon to separate it, and then the value on the right. Because we've got another one underneath it, then we have a comma. API version is just kind of suggesting the last time the API was updated, because quite often you'll want to use an API when it's got a new feature, so you need to check what date that came out and make sure you're using the right version. The body is going to be the same body that we sent in the request. So if I've said to Twilio, send a text message that says hello everyone, then it's just going to confirm, okay, I sent the text message from your account, you know, 12345. The message I sent was hello everybody. That's what's going to come in the body, because if you remember when we sent that here, this is what it said. And again, I know there's a lot of different stuff all over the place here. Again, this is what programmers look like. This is right in the weeds of programming, so don't worry about that too much. I'm just trying to help you find some things that your eyes can kind of focus on almost. It's going to talk about the date created. So the date created is when essentially the request for your text message was acknowledged. The date sent is when it actually went out. Now, as you can see, that was essentially 2 seconds after you sent the request. So you sent the request, 2 seconds later, the text went out. You might not need that information, but you've got it if you want it. And again, this is just a key, which is, I'm telling you, it's the date created, and then it's a value. The key will always be the same. Every single time you send an SMS through Twilio's API, you're always going to get the same keys back. That is a bit that you always know is going to be there, and as a result, your app can hook onto and can use. Whereas on the right here, we've got the value, which is the variable part. You know, it is always going to be different. If I sent that text today, it's going to say Wednesday the 17th of March 2021, you know, 11, 16, and then, I don't know, 31 seconds, whatever. So you've got date created, date sent, date updated, they all kind of do the same thing. Now, I don't necessarily need to go through everything here, because hopefully you can just see, look, it's a key, it's a value, it's a comma, it's a key, it's a value, it's a comma, so on and so forth. And you'll see, like, you know, for example, it's sent back the from number, it's just confirmed back to me, you know, what message I've sent it from. But let's have a look down at the sub-resource URIs. What's a URI? It's basically the same as a URL, and a URL is just a web address. Like right now I've got this one, twilio.com/doc/sms yada yada yada. That is a a URL or a URI. Now this one's talking about a sub-resource URI. I don't know exactly what that is, so let me just double check if it talks about it. Now you don't have to bother what I'm reading in the middle here. We'll get to that kind of thing eventually. I'm just flicking down it, and I do kind of understand it. Yeah, so what can happen is when you send an SMS message, you can also send what's called a multimedia message, which is just when you basically text somebody a picture. It's not used very much in today's day and age because most people are using WhatsApp, iMessage or something like that. But, you know, if you remember kind of how phones were before all that stuff was popular, you could send a text message with a picture in it, and that would go through. So if you've sent that, then this is essentially saying for every resource you've sent, I'm going to give you the picture, and it'll just give you a web link to where it uploaded the picture before it sent it. Again, you might not need that because you've just sent the picture, but it gives you a permanent location, a permanent URL that you can find it at, and it just confirms back to you exactly what it sent. So when you send a picture message, you could send one picture or you could send 50 pictures. The API doesn't know, so it's going to be prepared to have to give you media as a key over and over again. Because if you sent one picture, brilliant, there's your media key, and there's the URL to the picture that you sent. If you sent 5, then it's going to go media, picture, media 2, picture, media 3, picture, media 4, picture, so on and so forth. And so because of that, it has just encapsulated it within this little object. That's a little sub-object. It's called sub-resource URIs. Again, it looks a little bit complicated, but that's just essentially how it works. Now, you'll notice here there's not, you know, if you were typing in a URL, the first thing you probably type is google.com or twilio.com. That's not there. Because what actually happens is whenever you query an API, you have a default web address you're going to, which is the one that you send a request to. We'll talk about that in the next video as well, but it's like api.twilio.com/yada yada yada. And so as a result, even though this URL doesn't have the start of the message, what it actually means is twilio.com/API/2010 0401, etc. So you don't really need to understand all that. Frankly, if you're sending a text message, you can probably ignore almost every single little thing you just saw in there. That's kind of the beauty of it. You don't have to acknowledge it. If you really wanted to know the date that you sent it, you've got it. If you don't, just ignore it. You'll get all that data back. It's up to you what you do with it. And frankly, you can just say, brilliant, I've got a confirmation back that the API worked and I'm done. So I'm going to stop there. Video's getting quite long, obviously, because it's a really technical concept, but I'm going to jump into the next video and let's talk a little bit more about wider API documentation and how it works.